Krótkie życie.
You know, when I look at my archives, it looks like a mess in a house of crazy people who never throw away a thing and yet unable to organize or use it. When I sit in front of my archive, I ask myself, why did I make so many photos and videos? What made me make these choices in photography and in life? I never was dreaming of becoming a photographer. From childhood I saw myself as a writer of alternative and exciting books instead of photography. But photography seemed an easy way and also more entertaining. In photography you never have to be responsible for what you make. You can always say, it has been already there. And I was never good in creating things out of my fantasy. I had to go and look for the materials in the outside world, and that's why I had to become a photographer. I didn't know where I stood, and I didn't have a ground. I didn't know myself. I was nobody, and that's why it was so easy to go somewhere and become someone else. I began as a club and nightlife photographer, standing there looking at the people dancing under the drugs was like hypnotizing, like looking at the fishes in the aquarium. I was always an outsider, and photography was for me like a means to participate, a magic remedy from boredom. I never was a film photographer. I was in the beginning of the digital era. I wanted to go for life and action instead of spending nights in the dark room with chemicals. I was the only one from our small photo studio who had a digital camera, and that's why they sent me to this contest, the Delphi Games. I had no idea how to use a diaphragm or any other technical aspects. It was all horrible for me. Photography for me was all about pure soul. My portfolio was very weak at the moment, and I didn't know how to photograph and what to photograph. But I needed to do something special in 24 hours. So I went to the gypsy camp. I just started to follow those gypsies in a train until I got there to this place. From the beginning, photography was for me the ticket to the unknown and exciting worlds. I tried to come as close as possible into the worlds of misery, just to discover that there was not so much misery actually as it was in my imagination. There was a lack of life in me, and there was so much life in the outside world. Now, of course, this is a romantic idea of existence. You travel through the world with a camera around your neck and look for the beauty, truth, love, meaning, and the world seems so open and waits impatiently to see your new photos on an exhibition or in a magazine. And on the way you save the world from all the misery that is there. Of course, I followed this idea of changing the world to make the human conditions better, but I could do that even if I get my photos published. I won that contest with the gypsies, but they were displaced the very next day. Not because of me or not because of the publicity, but just because it was a common part of their life. And very many people talked about my brave and conscious approach and very little about the gypsies themselves. So the next what I knew was that the more personal your photography is, the more souls it touches. So I went to look for those personal stories where I could fully integrate myself as a person. And that's how I met another family. I met Lila on the street of St. Petersburg, and there is where it started for me, the story of a punk family with a little daughter. And I told that story so many times that it got stuck between my teeth, and I decided to make a book with all the details, and in this way I can close this endless story. My personal problem was that as a photographer you get some trust to enter the community, and afterwards you cannot ruin this trust. But photography is just a medium. It always shows what happened directly in front of the camera, if it's not manipulated, of course. For me it was a tragic story of love and falling down to the hell in Dostoevsky style, if you know what I mean. And I loved my subjects in a way. You cannot photograph without loving, without giving away a particle of yourself. It just won't work. In Russian language, the characters of the story always mean the heroes. It's the same word. And they were the heroes for me. The photographer is always responsible for what he does. It's a kind of original sin we all have. You get away with the images and the people stay there. This is the tragedy of photography.
Какая красота, дождь идет, я одна на тротуарах пузыри. Я считаю их, я не знаю вас.
I went to the Caucasus just for adventure. Many documentary photographers try to exclude themselves from the situation and present the story as if they haven't been a part of it. I have to be honest with myself and say that I went somewhere in extreme situations, not to save or to help somebody, or even not for the sake of telling these stories. Nobody has called me and asked if I can come and photograph them because they believe that the images can help them. Nor the magazines were ever eager to publish those kind of stories. No, I believe that every photographer has to have very strong personal reasons to go somewhere. And for me it was like itchiness. I had to take these images all the time, because the moment I pressed the button was the only moment I felt 100% alive. I needed to take strong images, important images, so the world opens in front of your camera in all that complexity. And I traveled and traveled all the time, having no time to see or process the images I was taking. For me, the process was much more important than the result. It's a strange state of mind where all the reality becomes just two-dimensional surface reflecting light. And I tried to catch the tail of reality, though I never succeeded. On the first day of my Caucasus trip, I got arrested because I saw tanks, and I was questioned for more than 24 hours, non-stop. And all my innocent images were confiscated and deleted. And I decided not to stop and to travel to Georgia all the way around and to make a small story in every republic. And Chechnya was on the corner of my mind since I saw the images of Stanley Green, black and white city torn by the war, and it came into my nightmares where I had to act hysterically inside of those photographs. The city, as I saw it, was completely renovated, though I still tried to find the traces of the war in the hearts of the people. Dagestan was known as a place for hiding the terrorists. I went to the high mountains where I could find no extremists, but instead of that I was asked to attend a wedding celebration. In Azerbaijan, I wanted to photograph about the oil industry, but never got an access to the oil island platform, so I ended up in a village on the oil field with the refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh, and it was the most despairing place I ever seen so far, even though people were looking at me with pity as at a poor vagabond. And they gave me the last sweets in the house instead of giving it to their own children, and I had no choice but accept it, even though it was too sweet for me. And finally I entered Georgia the same day the war started. It was so weird to be somewhere in a cheap hotel room with cold and fever, with no money and no contacts, and hearing in the hall the TV news with the sounds of gunfire, but not even knowing what's going on. The war looks much more horrible when you see it on TV screens. In the reality, there was one fire point where all the journalists wanted to go immediately after the fire has stopped. The face of war is the same all the time, and I don't know why you have to surf from one war to another to show just the same kind of cliches, except for the sake of adventure and adrenaline and a better success of your images. The war issue was horrible for me because I had to deal with all the politics and who was right and who was wrong, while seeing huge amounts of people losing everything they had. When I went to the refugees camp, I slept and ate there, and I took on all their lives, so I felt myself a kind of refugee too, and the same amount of despair, of course. When I returned home from every story, it took me so much time to settle down and find myself back again. And that's when I got a job in a magazine and became a real photojournalist. This is a story of LTP, a labor treatment pensionate for alcohol addicts in Belarus. At that point, I couldn't separate myself from my photography, and I became a part of each story, which I documented. And at the same time, I wanted to cover every story in the world, because everything seemed so important to me, and I lived so many lives that I couldn't bear it anymore. At the same time, the story of a punk family didn't let me go. Someone wrote to the police and the investigation has started. Everything turned at once so bad to me, everything was ruined. So the only way for me was to go to Cuba. sometimes you just need to get lost somewhere with the camera just to prove to yourself that the world exists. But the more you do that, the more you create your own world, and any idea of documentary approach seems just an illusion. With a camera, you become a tourist in any world and eventually in your own world. That's what Susan Sontag said. I needed to go to the other end of the world in order to find the world of myself there. Photography seemed to be like a practice of remembering something which I've already seen somewhere. It's like a religious ritual with strict rules and continuous practice, but it had no practical reason except that spiritual meaning. Once again, nobody was looking for my pictures, nobody wanted them, and I abandoned them myself at the very next moment I created them, like the children whom is so difficult to raise and to bring into the world, while all the joy is concentrated on the first part, on creating them, like an intense interaction of making love with reality. So often I lost my images, I forgot to copy them, I lost the whole hard drives with images. They could get burned, stolen, or even drowned in the milk. Yeah, it was like losing the children, but still, there were so many. In my travel to Cuba, I had no particular subject. The very fact of experiencing it struck me so much. Only to the end of it, I noticed that I concentrated only on women's stories: prostitutes, cabaret dancers, belly dancers, workers on the factory, single mothers. It was like if being a woman for myself was a too difficult task.
Какая красота, дождь идет, я одна на тротуарах пузыри. Я считаю их, я не знаю вас больше.
I went to Morocco, which was much more hostile and distanced from my soul country. With every trip and every story I tried to come as close as possible to the strange worlds and situations. But the closer I came, the more lost and disconnected from other people I felt. It seemed like being the inner symbolic travels in my mind than in reality. I got to a high mountain village where hashish was produced, but instead of making a successful story for a magazine, I devoted time more to the work with my own fears and fantasies.
Какая красота, дождь идет, я одна на тротуарах пузыри. Я считаю их, я не знаю вас больше.
In the end, I realized that going far away is too easy trick for a photographer, getting on adrenaline, adventure, and that effect of new impressions. Photography as a medium deceives its authors as well as its viewers. You just take the pictures, but not make them. The picture is not equal to the world, the story, or the subject. It exists in its own reality, where the human terms like truth, beauty, and justice are only partly applicable. And a documentary photographer serves equally to his audience, to his own purposes, as well as to photography itself as a medium, and there is no use to look at the logical explanation of this activity.